You know, when you think of 80s action films, you think of Arnold, Stallone, Van Damme, maybe Chuck Norris, and some awesome cannon films. Fighting, mountains of muscle, mountains of shell cases, one-liners for days. It was the era of unapologetic, glorious excess. We remember those movies as loud, triumphant, and a hell of a lot of fun. But what if I told you all of that was just a brilliant disguise? What if the biggest, baddest action movies of the era were secretly horror films? I'm not just talking about a few spooky scenes. No, I'm talking about the foundation of inescapable dread, monstrous killers, and gruesome body horror all hiding in plain sight. The action was just a Trojan horse that smuggled the pure horror movie and terror into the multiplex right under your nose. And we loved every single second of it, even if we didn't know it. So pop that tape in. I got you. Let's go do this. All right, 80s action films that were secretly horror. It was all right under your nose. And it started with the monstrous Invaders. Look no further than 1987's Predator. The first 20 minutes is almost a parody of 80s action. It's got Schwarzenegger as Dutch and his team of badass, muscle-bound commandos basically walking biceps with guns. It feels almost like a sequel to Commando, right down to the cheesy jokes. Then the tone flips on a dime. The confident hunters become the terrified hunted. The movie stops being an action flick and turns into a straight up slasher. It might as well be Jason, Friday the 13th. If you swap Arnold and the guys for horny college kids and you make it nighttime instead of day, you have a Friday the 13th film. This elite team gets reduced to nothing. All of their muscles, all their skills, all their weapons mean absolutely nothing. They're picked off one by one by a monster, a killer that stalks them from the shadows, just like any other horror slasher film. This was directed by John McTiernan, who is a master of action, and he used pure horror visuals in this movie, horror cinematography, everything stalking the killer's POV. That is straight out of horror films. That iconic thermal vision, the different way that the monster is looking at you. We hear those terrifying clicks and him mimicking the people. The Predator isn't a soldier itself, really. It's a slasher villain. Again, in the mold of Jason. That's exactly what this movie is. He mutilates his victims. He doesn't just kill them. He skins the corpses as trophies. So that is pure horror right there. And by the end, the ultimate action hero, Dutch, he's stripped of all of his guns. There's nobody else left. He's basically the final girl in this movie, and all of his machismo has meant nothing. Now it's down to him, scared, hiding, covered in mud, and he's trying to survive and be the good guy at the end of what comes out to be a horror film. Cool alien movie? Cool action movie? No, it is actually also just as much a horror masterpiece. And if Predator was a jungle slasher in the vein of Jason and Friday the 13th, then the Terminator brought the same kind of nightmares into the city. And what happened here is James Cameron basically took John Carpenter's Halloween, an unstoppable, emotionless killer stalking a young woman. It's the same setup as Halloween, and he gave it a sci-fi action skin. It's the same movie for all intents and purposes as Halloween. The T-800 is Michael Myers with a chrome endoskeleton and a much bigger gun, and it will not stop ever. That's the only real difference, is the technology and the setting. The story and what he is doing is the same as Halloween. The whole film is soaked in dread, horror, the stalking, the POVs, a basically emotionless monster that's after you. This "I'll be back" scene in the police station just feels like a very horror moment. You know that is coming back to get you. That is pure, unfiltered horror. The car chases, the shootouts, they were really just a spoonful of sugar to help the horror movie go down for action fans. Terminator, just a horror film in disguise. And then sometimes action movies were very influenced by body horror films, like straight up horror, like The Thing. You see that kind of stuff. Again, you got James Cameron here with Aliens in this movie that shifts from a slow burn, almost haunted house movie. Now, I've said that I think of this as sci-fi horror before I think of it as action, but really it's just all three. It depends on how you look at it and what part of the film. It turns into this thing where they're being stalked by a monster. But the body horror in here is what made the original so terrifying. The chest burster scene, the face huggers, all of that. It's basically a parasitic body horror nightmare. And then you get the famous line, "Game over, man, game over." Like, it's a pure scream of hopeless terror that you would find in a horror movie is exactly what that is. But the ultimate fusion of body horror and action really comes from another action film in the 80s, and that's Paul Verhoeven's satirical masterpiece, Robocop, which is the story of Alex Murphy, who is killed and disfigured and is basically a tragedy disguised in a power fantasy action sci-fi film. First, there's the horror of his death scene and a sequence that is so brutally violent that it feels like it came out of a low-budget exploitation flick. Had to have some of it cut down to keep from getting an X rating. Then there's the existential sort of dread that comes from this dystopian city and everything that goes along with it. And then Murphy becomes sort of a ghost in the machine. You've got body horror, dystopia. He's trapped within this framework of this new body. They take what's left of him and morph him into something else. Basically a Frankenstein body horror piece here. That is what it is. And his humanity is being consumed by this machine that is now part of him and by the dystopian society that he's thrown into. It is every bit that type of body horror. You could have found that in The Thing at the time. Definitely a horror film depending on how you look at it. So what was going on in the 80s that created the perfect storm of action and horror? And look, this is just a touch on this. I am working on a much bigger video of action horror films because there's so much more of it than you think. And some of it is straight on the nose horror hiding as action. There's no doubt about it. But when you think about this, it was just the era of excess. Horror was so popular. You had the horror boom, VHS boom, mom and pop video rental stores, and action movies were trying to get a piece of that action is exactly what happened. You've got this whole background of fear. You had the Cold War going on, so you had all the big action movies, but they still wanted to reach in and grab some of that success because horror was just exploding thanks to VHS. Practical effects at this time were also in their golden age. Legends like Stan Winston and Rob Bottin were pushing boundaries of gore, body horror, creature design. You had Bottin doing The Thing at the time. And again, that's being successful in horror. Action wanted to blend that in with some of their biggest stars. They think, hey, horror is exploding, action movies are exploding. We got these big action stars. What if we combine them? That is, the money is uncountable if we do this right? It could go to the moon and back. They could frame, though, under the guise of action, especially with like Stallone or Chuck Norris or Arnold leading the way. they could frame these action movies with the horror elements to really appeal to people who weren't necessarily horror fans and they were more just straight on action fans. They could hide it in there while also pulling in the big hardcore horror crowd and get the best of both worlds. So you take these, our muscle bound, awesome, legendary heroes of the 80s, they were basically our avatar and our psychological armor against horror films and the horror that's in those, and then you drop them into a horror film and you've got everything in one place. So when you look back, you see it everywhere. Predator was a slasher film. It was Friday the 13th with a bunch of muscle guys. The Terminator was Halloween set in an urban area with Arnold Schwarzenegger as Michael Myers. Robocop was a body horror tragedy. There's so much more in it. All this horror exploitation was hidden under a candy coating of action that let these movies smuggle themselves in and get you used to them in an unnerving way that you maybe otherwise wouldn't have. These films understood that the real stakes came from fear. Heroes weren't just fighting the bad guys, they were fighting for survival, and that made these movies horror stories. Maybe that's what's missing from action as they try for all these 4-quadrant blockbusters and blah, 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 and check box by committee. Maybe they're just missing that raw, unsettling edge, pushing the boundary, grabbing other genres and bringing it in. The 80s didn't have hard guidelines one way or the other. They just went for it. They wanted to entertain you, and when the heroes that they put in that you recognize had to stare into the abyss and fight the evil, you felt comfortable fighting that horror with them. And even if you weren't a horror fan, you dug the whole good versus evil with your larger than life heroes. And that made 80s action horror flicks. And listen, that went on into the 90s and even into the very early 2000s, and we will cover that. But I hope you enjoyed this little quick look at it, setting it up, because man, this is a fun little subsection of both horror films and horror fandom and action films and action fandom. And we're going to bring it all together right here. So stick around. Like and subscribe. If you enjoyed this and you want to help support what we're doing here a little bit more, hit the hype button. Apparently that kind of helps these things these days. Hype it up. Join the Patreon. The link is below. You'll get your name on every video. It gets updated every couple of weeks, so you'll see your name in lights. You've got special members only videos, physical media reviews, all kinds of extra content over there, and it helps the channel so much. We are almost at 50,000 subscribers. As I record this, we're about 500 or 600 away in a very short time, and I thank you so very much for that. We are going to have a massive giveaway and celebration when we get there, so make sure you are part of the pop culture family so that you don't miss any of it. But until next time, be kind, rewind like always. This is Chase with AV Pop Culture, and I'll see you real soon. Bye-bye. I know.